Welcome to the Walrus Talks at Home news and platforms presented by Facebook Canada. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus, and I'm thrilled to be your host this evening and to have the opportunity to bring people together across the country and beyond in conversation. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on. I'm in downtown Toronto, and I come to you from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto has long been a meeting place of Indigenous peoples, and we're honored to carry on a tradition of storytelling and conversation this evening. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the land that you're on and this moment in history that we're in. A bit about the Walrus. The Walrus is committed to being a platform for Canada's conversation, challenging, urgent, complex, and thoughtful conversations with a range of voices. And we do this in a number of ways, through our journalism, which you can find in print or online at thewalrus.ca, through our podcast, The Conversation Piece, and in our public event series, The Walrus Talks, which is now The Walrus Talks at home, my home, and your home. And this work is powered by our donors, our supporters, and our partners. So thank you all for being here, and to Facebook Canada for making this event possible. We're excited to welcome Facebook Canada as a national partner on the future of the internet. Tonight's event is part of a year-long partnership expanding the conversation on some of the most important digital issues of our time. Please welcome Rachel Curran, Public Policy Manager at Facebook Canada, to share some remarks. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Jen. Thanks so much. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for what promises to be a really interesting discussion on the evolving news landscape in Canada, particularly timely, I think, given the recent conclusion of the federal election. And thank you to the Walrus for hosting the discussion. At Facebook, we know that journalism plays an important role in seeking out the truth, telling the stories that define Canadians, and holding powerful people and institutions to account. We want to see a thriving news ecosystem and high-quality journalism, not because it's good for business, but because it's good for our democracy and good for all Canadians. And so because of that, we partner with Canadian news publishers to help promote a healthy news ecosystem. Our recently announced News Innovation Test aims to elevate authoritative journalism and deliver a valuable experience for people on Facebook who are interested in news. 17 Canadian publishers have now joined the test. The Globe and Mail, Black Press Media, and Glacier Media are the latest publishers to be added. But they span all regions of the country, including digital first and traditional newspapers in both official languages. As part of this test, we pay publishers for access to additional news links, things that are not already posted on Facebook. For example, this could include adding additional local and national Canadian news to hubs like the COVID-19 Information Center or the Climate Science Information Center. Earlier in March, we also announced an additional $8 million in programs to support the long-term sustainability of journalism in Canada over the next 3 years. We also work directly with news publishers, of course, large and small, to help them maximize the value that free Facebook tools provide. This includes free distribution that sends people directly to their websites, a value we estimate to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars per year for the Canadian news industry alone. And we want to continue to work with publishers, government, and the industry to contribute to the long-term sustainability of journalism. We believe Facebook can play a role in the solution, but we cannot be the only solution. So on that note, Jen, let's hear more from the pretty incredible panelists that we have here tonight. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Tonight's conversation explores the ever-evolving landscape of Canadian news media. And it's truly incredible the changes that journalists, newsrooms, and the public have witnessed over the last 2.5 decades plus. When I was in journalism school, and this is where I pull out my cane and shake it, The internet didn't have graphics yet. Typewriters were still on desks in our first year, and cell phones were called car phones. Now, journalists of all ages are navigating new platforms, new business models, new challenges, but also new possibilities. And for us at the Walrus, tonight's a bit meta because we are also in the business of news media ourselves. Here's how it works. Each speaker has 5 minutes, their talk, live. And once your head is full of new ideas, we'll have a moderated Q&A session with our speakers and you, our audience at home. To lead our conversation, I'm happy to introduce our moderator and my colleague, Jessica Johnson, the editor-in-chief of the Walrus. Hi, Jessica.
Thanks, Jen. Really exciting to hear everyone's thoughts and ideas tonight. I will begin by introducing our panelists. Tonight we are hearing from Anita Li, a journalism instructor, media consultant, and publisher and founder of The Green Line, which we'll be hearing more about. Emilee Gilchrist, co-founder, editor-in-chief, and executive director of The Narwhal. Myles, editor of Le Devoir. And Emilee Gilpin, managing editor of IndigiNews. Thank you all for joining us. We will begin tonight with Anita Li. Over to you, Anita.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Jessica. Hi, everyone. My name is Anita Li, and I am the founder, CEO, publisher, and editor-in-chief of The Green Line, which is a new local news publication here in Toronto that's all about investigating the way we live to help young Torontonians survive and thrive in a rapidly changing city. So I think a lot about journalism and its role in modern society. And in my opinion, journalism needs to evolve and truly step into its professed role as a public service. We've gotten away from this over the last decade and a half, which was a period when most news outlets relied too much on an advertising model, which incentivizes newsrooms to prioritize quantity of output rather than quality of journalism. But I want to take that idea one step further. Typically, when we think about the ultimate goal of a news outlet, it's to create a better informed populace. But newsrooms should expand upon that and aim for an outcome where the journalism we produce actually gets people to take action on issues that matter to them and their community. We're in a challenging and urgent time, and the only way to solve seemingly intractable issues is to collaborate across lines and to solve these systemic issues together. So if you take one thing from my talk tonight, it's this. I want to ask yourself, and especially journalism practitioners who are listening tonight, how do we as journalists engage attention to empower action? So I'll tell you about how I'm thinking about this in the context of The Green Line, which again is a publication that's all about investigating the way we live to help young Torontonians survive and thrive in a rapidly changing city. So I will talk about the target audiences that The Green Line serves in this particular context. And I'll talk about how I engage these audiences to, one, get them to pay attention and increasingly invest in the issues that they consume in The Green Line. And two, how I get them to take action on issues. So the primary target audience of The Green Line is action-oriented young urbanites. So these are Gen Zs and millennials in Toronto who are more diverse than previous generations, and they're looking for ways to take action on issues that really matter to them and their loved ones and their communities. And these folks are connected, they're activated, they're engaged. They're really the people who are the driving force behind a lot of major social movements of the last 5 to 10 years, whether that's the Climate March or Me Too March. The second target audience that The Green Line serves is underrepresented Torontonians, of which I actually consider young Torontonians to be part of. And I'm happy to answer questions about why I feel that way in the Q&A later. But underrepresented Torontonians that's kind of writ large. It's whether you feel, it's folks who feel like they're not well served by existing local media in the city. So that's whether, from an identity-based perspective, whether you're a senior or you're a person with a disability, or you're a member of the BIPOC or LGBTQ+ communities, and also from a geographic perspective. So we're talking about news deserts like Scarborough, my hometown, which are areas or news deserts that are like densely or highly populated, but are not well served by existing media. So in order to engage these audiences, I developed 2 funnels. And if you're unfamiliar with the funnel concept or the sales funnel concept, think of an upside down triangle where the largest group of audience members are at the very top and the smallest group of audience members are at the very bottom. But the audience members at the bottom are actually highly engaged and loyal. And the idea behind a funnel is that you're trying to get your audience to take actions to increase their loyalty and engagement to the point where they're going to take action on they're trying to execute an action that you want them to execute on, whether that's paying for a subscription or whether that's liking a Facebook post or signing up for a newsletter subscription. So from an intentional funnel standpoint, the idea behind the Green Line is that at the very top of the funnel, we produce comedy pieces, satirical ones that we know and love, like in The Onion and The Beaverton, op-eds, as well as behind the scenes content that shows kind of like how the sausage is made at the Green Line. And the idea behind that is that those are bite-sized shareable pieces of content that really engage. And if you think about, shows like Last Week Tonight, John Oliver, or shows of that manner, they're kind of first points of entry, and they're very accessible. It's a way to kind of be like, oh, that's really interesting. I want to learn more about this. So the second stage in the funnel is how to surface pieces that are journalism pieces that are really undervalued. They're the types of things that young people may Google at midnight when they're really stressed out. I know everyone who's been in their early 20s or teens have done this before. We're just like, what do I do in my life? How do I figure this out? How do I get affordable rent? How do I survive my finals? The next layer is original journalism, which is a Green Line take on a major Toronto news story. We're not trying to compete with the stars of the world. We're really trying to fill in gaps in coverage. And then at the bottom of that is in-depth solutions-driven long-form pieces that we publish once a month, or we will publish once a month once our hard launch happens in early 2022. The action funnel is extending that last piece, which is the in-depth solutions journalism, and kind of chunking it up into 4 weeks across a month. So the way I'm trying to get my target audiences to take action on issues that matter to them is through this. So week 1, the idea is to release an explainer that breaks down a systemic issue. Week 2, we publish the actual long form piece that's solutions oriented. Week 3, there's an event where we convene the reporter, the sources in the piece, as well as community members to discuss solutions to the problem. And then week 4, there's an article that we published that actually covers the event that effectively crowdsources the solutions from members of the public. And we reflect those solutions back to the members of the public so they can actually take action on them. So you're not, pent up with anxiety and stressed out about all these kind of negative headlines coming at you, and you actually have a pathway forward. And not only that, this kind of feedback or the solutions that are surfaced from this event will inform our ongoing editorial coverage. The last thing I want to mention is the formats. So I really encourage you guys to look up the Green Line on Instagram, which is where we're publishing in this pre-launch phase. And you'll notice that we really tailor the stories, which are really effectively deconstructed 400 to 500 word articles, to this very highly visual format. So you see that we use a lot of data interactives, short form bullet points, videos, audio clips. And I was really thoughtful about or tried to be thoughtful about the user experience and the user interface. You'll notice that there's a lot of green, which is calming. I try to use a lot of negative space. And so it's really just reimagining the entire experience of how people consume news, and especially young people inordinately consume news on social media. So I'll leave with you with that. The thing I'll leave you with is, I really would love everybody to check out the Green Line across social platforms and look out for our soft launch next month and our hard launch in early 2022. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emilee Gilchrist. I'm one of the co-founders of the Narwhal, and I'm also editor-in-chief and executive director, and I'm really happy to be here today. I'm here in Victoria on the territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, home to the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and the WSÁNEĆ people, who still enjoy a very rich relationship with this land until this day. I'm so excited to be here to tell you a little bit about the Narwhal, the little whale that could. We launched about 3 years ago, originally out of British Columbia, and we've now expanded to Alberta. We've had reporters in the north, and we just launched a bureau in Ontario as well. And during that time, we've gone from 2 staff to 16 staff, and the single largest source of our funding has become our monthly members, who are readers who voluntarily pay each month to make the Narwhal possible. And it's really interesting to think about how that kind of fundamentally shifts your relationship with the readers. But first, I'll tell you a little bit more about the actual content that we produce on the Narwhal, in case you're not familiar. So we call ourselves an online magazine, and we publish in-depth and investigative journalism about Canada's natural world. And there's a few kind of hallmarks of that content. One is the visuals. So we really invest in the visual experience on the Narwhal. We have no advertising on our site, which enables us to have a really beautiful, full width visual experience. And a lot of the places that we report on are places that are out of sight and out of mind. So we think it's really important to bring people visuals from those places to help make these massive environmental issues more real for folks. Another kind of hallmark of Narwhal journalism is context. So we try to ensure that all of our stories are really context rich. And the reason for that is that we really want our journalism to help people make meaning of the world. And when I look at some traditional journalism, sometimes I find that it doesn't actually help you make meaning of the world. You kind of get into the he said, she said, not a lot of context about the issues that would actually help people understand the issues. And kind of the third hallmark of Narwhal journalism is that we're really intentionally working to bridge divides. Environmental issues can be incredibly polarizing. We really work to bring in people of all different kinds into our journalism, whether that be resource workers, people from rural communities. We really emphasize Indigenous perspectives in our work. And we think it's really fundamentally important to harness the power of journalism to bridge divides. In this last year, the organizers told me to brag about myself, so I will a little bit. We won 10 National Journalism Awards, including a World Press Freedom Award for our investigative reporting on the Site C Dam, the General Excellence Award from the Digital Publishing Awards, and several national magazine awards for photojournalism and feature writing. So yeah, we're really thrilled to be helping to pioneer a new model of reader-funded journalism in Canada. And maybe to speak to that a little bit, I'll just speak a little bit about my background. So I started out my journalism career in the traditional journalism world. So about 10 years ago, I was working at the Calgary Herald, and at that time, like every newspaper in the country had an environment reporter. Basically, over the next decade, I watched all of those beat reporter positions evaporate and the environment be left really kind of wide open for the taking, because there was just so little, in-depth, context-rich coverage happening on that beat. After I left the Herald, I went into the nonprofit sector for 4 or 5 years, which at the time I really grappled with. I struggled with it because I thought I was leaving journalism forever. But as it turned out, I got to come back around and kind of combine the things that I learned in the nonprofit world with my experience in journalism. And so that's really what we're doing at the Narwhal. So we're a nonprofit, and we recently became Canada's first English language registered journalism organization, which allows us to issue tax receipts to all of our donors, our members, and it also allows us to receive grants directly from philanthropic foundations, which opens up new and exciting avenues of funding for us. And back to that kind of, shifting relationship with the audience, because our members are such a big part of what we do, our single largest source of funding. This year, they'll give us over $600,000. It really gives us the ultimate freedom and independence to report on what the audience wants and needs. It also encourages us to, engage our audience as parts of stories, as sources of story tips. We have a really thriving and energetic relationship with our audience and our members, and it's quite a beautiful thing. I'll leave it there.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak to the audience tonight. I feel privileged to share the stage with so many inspiring panelists. I'll talk a bit about Le Devoir and try to move on other topics. Le Devoir, for those of you who don't know it, was established in 1910. It's published in French, and Le Devoir has always valued quality over quantity in their content. We strongly focus on niche topics like politics, environment, public debate, arts, etc. Le Devoir is a corporation. We operate as a for-profit business, even though the margins are slim. And our majority shareholder is a trust, which is nonprofit. And this is very special. I don't think any newspaper in Canada is structured like us. The trustees lend me their voting powers on the majority shares for the duration of my mandate. So I kind of act as a protector of the independence of Le Devoir. And the trustees act as protector of my own independence. They make sure that I have the freedom to act and operate Le Devoir as I see fit. I can do almost everything I want when it comes to content, strategic planning with the oversight of the board. There are only a few things that I cannot do, which is sell the newspaper, merge it, I need to secure the tradition of independence and freedom for Le Devoir. This is why it's so unique. Cannot be sold, cannot be bought, and I have a simple, very, very simple task as an editor. I have to aim higher for the benefit of our highly educated readers. Aim higher all the time. This is quite simple. When you think of it, it's easy to focus on a mission, which is so easily crafted. We rely on a multi-platform strategy, which means that we are thriving both in the digital and print environment. We produce some old school journalism, written journalism in the print edition, 6 days a week. And we go up to video data journalism, and soon probably we'll move into podcast with the great applause in my newsroom. The key to our success, which is a relative success, is the audience. We rely mostly on subscriptions and donation, even though we cannot emit tax receipts yet. We're trying to figure that one with the CRA. Back in 1997, when everybody at the time was talking, the older ones here in the audience will remember the buzzwords about the free flow of information or the information highway. Content was supposed to be king, content was given away. Le Devoir was the first media outlet to raise a paywall on our ASIN website, the very first one. It proved to be one of the best decisions that my predecessor, Bernard Descoteaux, I have to give him the credit. Bernard was the one who came up with a paywall, bluntly saying, if we give away our content, we're going to be dead in 5 years. So that's the extent of the reflection at the time, but we were able to build on something. And the main question for us and for myself is always the same. How can you say content is king when you disregard the relationship between your content and your readers? If content is king, well, your audience will follow you in a business model that is based on subscriptions. We have proven over the years that we can actually talk to print and digital readers at the same time. We kind of say out in the joke that we speak to the grandfathers and the sons and the great children. Our readers come from all the generations. They're just curious about quality information, and they can actually relate to our content. The key thing here is to adapt and deliver the right type of content on the best suitable platform. I kind of like the writings and thoughts of Josh Benton, who's the head of the Neiman Lab. Benton established a list of criteria to measure success in a digital transformation. And Le Devoir checks 3 boxes out of 4, which are namely making more revenue from readers and from advertising, achieving net revenue growth when digital dollars are rising more quickly than print dollars, and having more digital subscribers than print subscribers. Those are the 3 ones that we check. There's a 4th one that is missing, and it's very important, is to make more revenues from digital sources than from print. It's a journey that we've taken, and we don't take anything for granted. Our success are prudent and relative, but we are cautiously optimistic about the future. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I am Emilee Gilpin, and I'm the managing editor of IndigiNews. Thank you first to the organizers for putting together this event and making space for this important conversation that I'm grateful to be a part of. Thank you to the panelists for sharing their good insights and everyone who's joining in today or catching this later. I'm a mixed person and I go by she, her pronouns. I'm Métis, a member of the Manitoba Métis Federation and Filipina through my father, and 3rd and 4th generation settler with Irish, Scottish, and British ancestry on my mother's side. I grew up in Southwestern Ontario and have lived and traveled a little bit of everywhere for over a decade. I'm currently a visitor on the traditional and unceded territories of the Wasanich Nation on so-called Vancouver Island. When I'm not working, I train in capoeira, Muay Thai, and street self-defense, which helps me travel alone as a journalist. I participated in a graduate course in journalism at Concordia University in 2016, where it became glaringly apparent to me that the state of journalism in North America was in need of tender love and care. It was a time when people were saying journalism as we knew it was dying, that there were no more jobs for journalists. And the more that I learned about the state of the industry and the culture of newsrooms across North America, the more I felt, so be it. Down with the old and in with the new, or in with the old, which I'll elaborate on. Due to my family history and lived experiences, as well as my education and training on anti-oppression and anti-racism, I wasn't surprised that all of my professors were white, mostly male, and that I was being taught colonial journalism with a low ethical bar for the communities that people wanted to work with. Walking through the press room in Canada's Parliament building a few years later while reporting on a historic apology delivered to the Tethkoti Nation for the wrongful hanging of 6 of their war chiefs, I peered at photos of Canada's founding fathers of journalism, old white men that looked, thought, and talked nothing like me. The more I looked with intention at journalism schools and newsrooms across the country, the more I saw how much harm mainstream media could and has caused, exploiting people, perpetuating trauma porn, repeating harmful stereotypes, and writing inaccurate depictions of people and places that they claim to want to cover. Seeing Red, a heavily researched book by Carmen Robertson and Mark Anderson, does a fantastic job of outlining how Canada's history of English-speaking newspapers were used to outline and support a colonial agenda. Newspapers used as an arm of the state, written by one demographic of people. All of us here today know the importance of newspapers in defining reality, outlining truth, documenting history. So I started to look more deeply at whose voices were missing or severely misrepresented, and how, if I was going to get involved in this media machine, was I going to be a part of changing that. I started giving workshops at Concordia to other journalism students and communication staff, as well as other newsrooms over the years, providing tools and techniques on how to avoid oppressive words and ideologies, decenter the colonial gaze on colonial legal systems, beliefs, and perspectives, and perpetuating false narrative and homogenous narratives of diverse peoples. We explored how Indigenous storytelling, news sharing, and oral traditions are still alive and well and can provide ethical standards of practice for any storyteller today. I called these workshops Decolonizing Journalism. I spoke up in my class and corrected my professors at times, walked out during a class on the TRC that only showcased Stephen Harper's court-mandated apology, and offered no critical insight into the attempted genocide of Indigenous peoples or forced assimilation policies that trickled down through my family. I felt shunned and shamed at times for challenging the standard of practice, and was told by multiple so-called journalism experts that I wouldn't get a job because I wasn't objective enough. And yet I was the only person from my graduate cohort to get a job right out of the gate. I interned with the Tyee for a summer, focusing mostly on a series of profiles of urban Indigenous women, and then took a job with National Observer, leading their First Nations Forward series dedicated to stories of strength and success in Indigenous communities across BC. I hustled to try and get out Indigenous voices, be a vehicle for people to speak for themselves for once, rather than be spoken about by people with completely different life experiences, worldviews, and cultural context. I stayed in Brazil in 2019 after my sister's wedding, where I did some freelance reporting, but a lot of witnessing and listening, inspired by grassroots media and activism across Central and South America. I started a Facebook Live series as soon as the pandemic took off last year, hearing from Indigenous scholars, activists, elders, masters, leaders, and community members, and then was offered this fantastic role with IndigiNews to be the managing editor and help support a new wave of Indigenous journalists. IndigiNews was created through a partnership through APTN and The Discourse. The goal of the partnership was to provide journalism that serves and is driven by what local communities say they want, and to experiment with new business models for digital local news that contributes to the long-term sustainability of independent Indigenous news in Canada. Discourse Media, already an impact-driven independent media platform, planted the seeds for IndigiNews, attaining funding through the Local Journalism Initiative. We hired 3 journalists in the Okanagan and 4 across Vancouver Island, some part-time and some full. It has been quite a year. We've been out here raising the ethical bar on how to report on Indigenous stories, training people with little to no journalism experience, rather than saying there's not enough Indigenous journalists to hire or no one applied. We set up a mini journalism boot camp in school, brought in seasoned Indigenous journalists while pumping out as many stories as we could, giving meat to the bones of the saying, representation matters. We ran a series on reproductive health last year that included an investigation into the practice of birth alerts and internal documents that revealed legal experts warned MCFD that the practice was unconstitutional, triggering pressure on the industry that has been likened to the residential school system. As a team of Indigenous mothers, aunties, community members who wear many hats, we've cried, laughed, and fought together. We created a new newsroom culture at IndigiNews, a nurturing and supportive environment that values the well-being of our employees rather than glamorizing capitalism and patriarchy. IndigiNews claims to be a media outlet that you can trust. Due to the colonial history of newspapers in Canada, it's not a surprise that trust has needed to be built up again. And we are doing just that. We practice trauma-informed, anti-oppressive journalism, self-locating on certain topics, working with our sources on care plans. We're a place where community members can see themselves reflected and represented accurately. We're filling in gaps of coverage, sharing voices of people on the ground. We lost a large part of our LGI funding when contracts weren't renewed and weren't able to keep on our whole team. But while we've downsized, we've continued on and gotten creative. We consistently discuss and address our intentions. Is it to get likes, views, and awards, or are we here to tell the truth, to show up when it matters, to amplify Indigenous voices in the ecosystems and relatives that we're closely tied to change the harmful narratives that have been caked into this country's colonial conscience, to document the many faces of this unfolding story, and to make a difference in our communities on the ground? We continue to find ways to generate steady revenue, to grow, adapt, and evolve, and hopefully have a presence in communities across the country as we continue to grow. We've only been here for over a year. I wonder where we're going to go from here. So check out IndigiNews if you haven't already. Subscribe, support, and follow on our journey. I'm happy to share more about some of the opportunities we've had to collaborate with aligned organizations. Journalism isn't going anywhere. As speakers have touched on tonight, we have come far from where we've been, but there is still work to do to create a higher standard of accuracy and accountability in the press. I have said for the past years that the media is in a stage of metamorphosis, and we have an opportunity to change and strengthen the culture of the industry in order to support its sustainability. I see everyone here doing that tonight in their own way, and I'm proud and grateful to be a part of these changing tides. Hi, thank you.
Thank you, Anita Li, Emma Gilchrist, Brian Myles, and Emilee Gilpin. We're excited to now open up this conversation live. We do have audience members registered tonight from Fredericton, Yellowknife, Glasgow, Amsterdam, and Manila, in addition to many other places. If you're here, you can please let us know in the chat where you're calling in from. We encourage everyone joining us from home to share this conversation on social media. You can tag us at The Walrus and use our hashtag Walrus Talks. If you have questions for this Q&A portion we're about to begin now, please submit it via the Zoom chat or in the Facebook Live comments. And now I will welcome back all our talkers for the Q&A session. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for those great thoughts and ideas. And the question of reader engagement came up in one way or another, I think, in every single person's talk. And one thing I was wondering about is that tension between popularity, clicks and likes, and what you might see as your own brand or integrity in your journalism. I wondered if you might want to speak to that. And Emma, maybe you could talk a bit about it because I think you spoke first.
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's a real difference between an article that's popular, it might get a ton of views, and an article that drives a lot of engagement. Over the last year, we've been able to develop ways where we can track which articles drive newsletter subscriptions or memberships, for instance. And those aren't necessarily the same articles that go viral. So it's really, really interesting to see the difference there between, you know, maybe a really moving profile of an Indigenous leader that drives a ton of subscriptions and memberships versus a really, you know, kind of sexy headline about an oil spill or something that might drive a ton of views, but not drive as deep as engagement. So we really try to measure our relationship with our audience, both by, you know, the size of it, but also the depth of the relationship.
Emilee, I think you've built that into your business model. I saw that you have the tagline impact over clicks in your editorial guidelines. Do you want to speak to that? And how does it help you build a relationship with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it a little bit in that little round page there, but, you know, we're building trust. You know, we're working with our communities. A lot of our reporters are living in their communities. So, you know, we're not really out here to try and get as many likes and clicks as we can. You know, we want to let people know that we're here, that they can reach out, that they can share their stories when they otherwise haven't. So ours is really about relationship, you know, building relationships, rebuilding trust, showing that we are going to do things differently, that we're not going to exploit people in times of trauma. whether it's from the uncoverings of the bodies this past summer on former residential institutions, or, you know, in the middle of wildfires when journalists are swarming in and trying to get pictures of people. We're showing people that we're not going to do that. We're going to do things differently. So yeah, that's pretty important to us.
Thanks, Brian. I have a question for you. Something that's been an issue or driving force at many big newspapers now is the rise of opinion columns versus the traditional reporting. I wondered, is that how do you navigate that tension at the Devoir?
Well, it's not so much a tension, but it's more of an intention to offer diversity of point of views to the readers. Our readers value factual information as well as columnists and opinion. You just need to make the distinctions very clear. We separate facts from opinion, and we rely mostly on reporting. But the op-ed pages and the columnists are the people who are always the most read in the newspaper and on the website. People thrive for opinion. We just need to make sure that we offer quality in the opinion expressed, and that we tend to ask for on our columnists a strong commitment to fairness and equity in the way they will report their topics. I think Emma was bringing a good point, but you need to do both. If you rely on subscriptions, people need to know you and discover you before they subscribe. So you need to generate a bit of traffic in order to have a big funnel of conversion. The more people know you, the more chances that you will convert them into a subscriber. And this process for us takes a year. From the point in time when someone discovers the Devoir and the point, well, they will subscribe, we can actually count 12 months. So traffic is important as long as it's not clickbait.
Brian, Le Devoir was very prescient in keeping up a paywall from the dawn of internet publishing. How crucial is that part of your success today?
Well, 2/3 of our revenues come from readers and donations, 2/3. We still have advertising. It's not the majority of our revenues, but it's there. We still need advertising to sustain our needs. And there's a third way that's been emerging is compensations or partnership with Facebook, Microsoft and Apple. Those three corporations contribute to Le Devoir's revenues. And even though the Liberal government wants to table legislation, we strongly believe that the first step that you need to do as an editor is to find ways to talk with social medias. There was a time 2 years ago where social medias and traditional media weren't talking that much to each other. And we discovered over the time that you need to secure a new kind of relationship with them, and they're open to it. And this relationship is based on trust and mutual respect. And even whether there's a law or not, trust and respect are the basis of a new conversation with them.
Anita, you're pioneering a new type of publishing almost, because you are publishing in a social media platform. A lot of media outlets will adapt their reporting for Instagram or Twitter, but you're actually doing Instagram exclusives, aren't you?
Yeah, so I think a lot of publications adapt their reporting for multi-platforms, but I often find that that sometimes you see publications trying to shoehorn certain content onto platforms that are inappropriate. For example, just reposting a TikTok video onto Instagram, and that just the audiences that exist there, especially the younger folks, they can smell the lack of inauthenticity. They can see that you're just kind of being lazy about disseminating the story onto the platform, as opposed to really being thoughtful about how to craft it in a way that actually that's tailored to the platform, and actually, as a result, can resonate better with the target audience. So I am doing Instagram exclusives, but this is not the only thing that I'm doing. And in fact, I want to speak to the first question that you asked everybody else around engagement, because I don't think it's a binary conversation between impact versus clicks. They're all important part of the funnel spectrum. And so part of what I'm doing is producing a lot of comedy stuff and comedy content, op-eds, as well as behind the scenes content on TikTok, and then do Instagram exclusive stories that are originals and service oriented, And then on the website, it's far more in depth. So it's kind of like encouraging my readers or consumers to kind of explore the different news products that I have and bring them along and build loyalty and build trust, engage them more deeply as they kind of go through the content offerings.
Okay, great. I'd love to hear more about how you're working with young people in a bit. But first, let's talk about the thing that's right in front of us. The pandemic has upended almost everything we knew about so much of life, including the way we relate to audiences. For us at the Walrus, we found differences in our traffic patterns, like the usual commuter hour for people reading was not to read at other times. What are things that you've been doing to try to meet people where they are right now, whether that's on platform or geographical location, or even their engagement with your work? Is it more vital? Is it more disinterested? I guess, Anita, you're meeting with them where they are by meeting them on the internet.
So I'm meeting them where this is based on a lot of exhaustive research. I also was, I worked in largely, when I was working in America for a long time, I was in management positions at youth-oriented publications. So I really understand internet culture and youth culture really well. I was news director at Complex, which is a hip hop publication, Mashable, which is a tech, like youth-oriented tech publication, Fusion, which really was focused on diverse and underrepresented communities in the US. So it's not only meeting them where they are in terms of platforms, but it's also seeking out these communities and meeting them where they are. So one of the first things I've done is try to engage local community organizations on the ground. We have partners like the East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club, which is obviously in a news desert like Scarborough. We are connected to Food Share, which is like a local grassroots organization that explores food justice. So it's really important for me to actually interact and engage with these small organizations as well as local folks on the ground to figure out what actually matters to them. And engage them from the get-go, because it's up to me to earn their trust. It's not up to them to find me, you know?
What advice would some people on this panel give young journalists who want to go into the business? It's an exciting time, but it's in some ways never been harder.
Well, I can go if you want, or leave everybody else. I've talked a bit so far. So ladies, go ahead, please.
I'm asking because we know everyone wants to be a journalist, right? It's the best job in the world.
Yes.
This is such a tough question. I feel like Emilee is going to have the best answer to this somehow. But yeah, I mean, I would just say that, you know, the opportunities that exist today for people like me and Anita and Emilee didn't exist like 5 years ago. So things are really rapidly changing. Like when I left the Herald, I basically thought I'd never work in journalism again. And it turns out that was really wrong. And now, you know, if you're passionate and you can find a subject that isn't being covered anywhere else and find an audience for it and connect with them, there is a way to do this, basically. I mean, it's not easy, and I'm not going to pretend that that's accessible to everybody, but there are possibilities that exist now that didn't exist before. And I think in the new media space, it's a super exciting time with lots of new opportunities.
I'll just add on to that and say I totally agree with that. I think there are way more opportunities for people who are interested in maybe just familiarizing yourself with what exactly you love to do. Like maybe you're a more investigative journalist, right? Or maybe you want to be more involved in the social media campaign with a certain news organization. Maybe you want to be doing daily news. That's your thing. You know, you want to be showing up, spending more time on stories, like really just maybe spending some time to recognize what is it that I love, what kind of journalist do I want to be, and then being able to really express that to the organization that you want to work with, that you approach.
Yeah.
Emilee, do you think there's things that Indigenous media can do that mainstream media can't touch in Canada? Just can't do?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a big way it's and there's different kinds of, you know, Indigenous media. Like we're one example of kind of community, and we're restrained, you know, by the LGI funding and that sort of thing. But I think it's relationships. And, you know, in journalism, they use certain words like access, right? And obviously I kind of question some of those words because it can feel very exploitative, but it's, you know, it's relationships. It's being asked, like a number of our reporters, pretty much everyone has been like, hey, this is a story that, you know, we just want to share with you, or yes, you can come into my home, or yes, you know, you can come to this gathering or to this potlatch, or, you know, please show up here. And So it's, it's relationships, building that trust, and then also, cultural nuances, like not that an Indigenous journalist is just going to get it just by being Indigenous, but if you've lived or have lived experiences or have families or relationships, you're going to understand a lot of things that people outside of these communities just maybe don't get in terms of nuances and certain words that just wouldn't be used, that can kind of create a block in a relationship. So yeah, I think it's a context, it's relationship, it's understanding a bigger picture. I think there's a lot of things that Indigenous journalists are able to do differently.
How does everyone feel right now about the next 5 or 10 years? Optimistic or scared? And 3 of you have outlets that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. So
I feel super optimistic in the new media space. Like if you just look at like 3 years ago, the Narwhal was like 2 young women with a dream, and now we have 16 staff. And I think that's only going to keep growing, and the model's really sustainable. So I feel really optimistic, and we're just one little example, because I think lots of other outlets can pop up and like replicate that kind of model and use other kinds of models that are working as well.
Yeah,
I feel optimistic too, but go ahead, Anita.
Oh, sorry, Brian.
Go ahead.
Crosstalk on Zoom.
I'll go after you.
Thank you. I am also very optimistic. I several years ago, I anticipate that there was like many of my peers here, anticipate that there would be an explosion of digital media news outlets that emerged in Canada, and I'm so excited by that. I remember actually leaving. I moved to New York City because I just couldn't cover the stories that I wanted to, and I actually remember working at the Star and having editors tell me, like, the stories that you're pitching are not for our audience, but how do you define our audience, right? And I went to the States because I wanted to cover racial justice issues, equity issues that I was passionate about, that I didn't see any other Canadian outlets covering. And then since I've moved home after, during the discourse, after then subsequently leaving to start my own consulting business and then launching the Green Line, there's like so many different pathways in journalism, which is so incredibly exciting. And I also felt like, oh my gosh, I'm leaving the Toronto Star year-long internship for this, like blog effectively. What am I doing? I'll never be able to work in this country again. And it didn't end up being the case. Like it's such a fantastic time for young journalists to enter the field. And there's just so many resources for you to go it alone, or go it, take the traditional route, or, work in a smaller team. So I think it's cool.
You'll find that I'm a bit old school or naive, but I do believe that as long as we live in a vibrant democracy and a stable one, there will be a need for trusted information and quality of reporting. I think that readers will be willing to pay for that content. When I started in the business in 93, 91, there was no jobs around. I was ashamed to have a full-time job at the Devoir in my generation. It was nothing that you could expect. Today, there are jobs everywhere, and you can create your own opportunities like you did. And it's very impressive what you did so far, ladies. There's also something that we need to address, is the fact that we're going to be thriving as long as we realize that we're not mass medias anymore. Facebook is a mass media. We're not even in a breaking news industry. Twitter is breaking news. We all operate to some extent in the long tail. We are mostly niche players. Some niches are bigger than others, but we're not mass media anymore. So we have to tailor our content to the need of the audience. This is what you're all doing and all advocating for. And this is what we're trying to do at the Devoir as well. If you stay focused on the relationship with your readers and your audience, you'll be fine. You'll sleep well most of the time, but nothing has to be taken for granted. There are things that we did 3 years ago that doesn't work anymore. And newsletters are big right now to gather new users and to generate a database. Maybe in 2 or 3 years from now, newsletters will be dead. I don't know, but I tend to prepare myself for the best and the worst at the same time. And this is how I can sleep at night.
Last question from me, and then I'll see if we have room for some audience questions. How does diversity and inclusion fit into the business model? Because a lot of what we're talking about is how we're surviving financially in a time when media in traditional senses is quite threatened. What do we need to do over the next little while to ensure that the media is in a better place than it is right now in Canada, especially?
So I actually think that prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice is a way to actually make your outlet more financially sustainable. Because when you're serving, you're not just serving a homogenous group of like faceless audience members where you're just saying like putting the label broadly, oh, Canadians or Torontonians. You're really hyper serving niche communities that, in particular, if they're underserved, they're going to be responsive, they're going to be loyal, they're going to be engaged, and they're going to be far more likely to actually pay for the coverage that you produce for them. So I mean, I think it's incumbent, or it's essential for the survival of any modern news outlet today to make sure that they embed those best practices from the foundation. And that this needs to be, also leadership needs to take it seriously, because as we know, culture is dictated by folks at the very top. And so you need to walk the walk. There's no going back. There's no excuse. Like, we've arrived. And so if you're not doing it, you're just behind, frankly.
Yeah, everything Anita said. And I totally agree. It's like imperative to running a successful business as well as being the right thing to do. And, you know, by having more diverse writers on staff, for instance, you're going to tell better stories, you're going to produce better journalism, you're going to be able to serve communities in a better way. And at the end of the day, I think like a lot of our outlets for us here today, like there's room for us because there were massive gaps left by traditional media and massive communities left unserved by traditional media. And our, you know, sense of duty to those communities and a sense of where we can actually create revenue to sustain that journalism has led us to filling those gaps.
Emilee, you have a small outlet, and I think of all the people you haven't talked about where your funding comes from, what do you need to succeed? What can all of us listening help you do to keep going?
Thanks for that. I mean, I just want to add on to that last question. I think everyone made some really good points, and I'll just remind us that this younger generation that's growing up with a whole different access to internet and all of these different social medias, like they're going to take this whole industry by storm as well. So I think diversifying is crucial to the success and sustainability of all of our business. But you know, yeah, we have a small team, and we've been primarily funded through the Local Journalism Initiative, which, you know, has been great to be able to have these opportunities to work with new reporters and, you know, kind of train Indigenous journalists and get out there and tell these stories. But it's not sustainable, right? Because we only get these contracts yearly, and there's a lot of restraints, and that's restricted what we've been able to do and report on. So, you know, otherwise we do rely on our subscribers, right? We rely on people because we don't have advertisements either. And then like-minded organizations. So, you know, I would again encourage people to support and subscribe and share the word. And, but I always believe as well, like you have to provide something that people want. You know, I don't like to just kind of beg, you know, please help us. It's like people are going to pay for what they want. And when you show them that you're, you know, providing something that's worth their time and energy, then that's a good trade, right? So I think definitely to spread the word as well and to get involved would be very, very grateful, but we're going to be doing our part as well. So that might be an organic reach. Thanks.
I have one question from Kevin Chan of Facebook, who would like to know how platforms have helped or hindered organizations like yours. I think all of us are funded by Facebook on this talk.
We total honesty here, we're part of the Facebook initiative that Devoir has signed with Facebook. We need Facebook to in the funnel of engagement. Our videos or reporting, when we post it on Facebook, they get traction, more traction than if you put them on a website. People come to the news by social media nowadays. So it would be foolish on our part to block Facebook or not to use Twitter or not to use Google. You need to build a relationship to use those platforms as tools. And once they step up and do partnerships, again, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and Google are all willing right now to speak with publishers and to strike deals. And they do that in the French and English environments. It's only up to the editor to put them on the list and speed dial their numbers or their emails and find a way to secure a new kind of relationship. This is the basis. And again, some people are questioning the legislative intentions from the federals. What are we expecting from them? Whether they legislate or not, the main thing is to sit at the same table and try to find common ground and a new relation and a new deal. That's
Okay.
the ABC of it.
I've let us run too long for that. I'm sorry. We have reached the end of our Q&A session, but the conversation is never over. I'd like to thank our talkers and everyone who joined us today for this conversation, very close to my heart. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jennifer Hollett.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thanks to our speakers, Anita Li, Emma Gilchrist, Brian Myles, and Emilee Gilpin. If you enjoyed today's event, we have more coming up live in October. On Tuesday, October 19th, TD Bank Group presents the Walrus Talks at Home, Reimagining Resilience. And then on Tuesday, October 26th, Facebook Canada is back with us again to present the Walrus Talks at Home, CanCon Online. And then on October 28th, we'll have a talks presented by Media Smarts. Just check in with us at thewalrus.ca/events. You can RSVP. Also, we'll post videos from tonight so you can watch them again and share them. Also, keep an eye on your inbox. The best way to stay up to date with the Walrus and not miss any event is to opt in for our newsletter. At the Walrus, we believe that trustworthy journalism is an essential service. And with your support, we can continue to do what we do, which is provide fact-checked, thought-provoking journalism. So if you enjoyed this free event, consider making a donation. You can go to our website at thewalrus.ca and click on donate. Donations $20 or more will receive a charitable tax receipt. Thanks again to Rachel, Kevin, Mark, and Aaron at Facebook Canada for making this conversation possible tonight and our year-long partnership together. Thanks to our annual sponsors, Facebook Canada, as well as Inspire, Labatt Breweries of Canada, Air Canada, and Shaw. Community is really important in these COVID times, and each one of you is part of the Walrus. Thank you so much and have a great evening.